All right.
Nobody's paying attention. Everybody needs a hammer.
All right, let's go ahead and get started. I can only contribute so much to the city's general fund in the form of parking tickets, so let's get. So today is Friday, January 25th. This meeting is called to order. This is a meeting of the El Paso Metropolitan Planning Organization Transportation Policy Board. Please stand for the pledge. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Before we get started on the open comment period, I just want to first recognize new members who are with us today. We have Judge Samaniego. Thank you for being here. We also have Councilman Rivera from the city of El Paso. And then we also have Mayor Pro Tem Benjamin Romero as well. So thank you for being here. I also want to, Dr. Morgan, Dr. Morgan, welcoming again to the MPO. Happy to have you all. I also want to congratulate the members of the state delegation on their committee assignments. Representative Moody, and former chairman, who is now the Speaker Pro Tem, also Vice Chairman of Calendars. It's a very great reflection on El Paso, and we wish you all the best of luck. I know Representative Gonzalez is on appropriations and public education, and Representative Ortega got on transportation, and Representative Blanco on economic development and international relations. So we've got El Paso is well represented, but we wish you all the very best of luck in the upcoming session. We also have some departing members. As you all know, Representative Pickett resigned his office. Representative Pickett has been involved in public service since the 1970s, I want to say. He was a former city councilman, but was chairman of this organization multiple times, and he's going to be sorely missed. I know Mayor Miller had wanted to say a few things.
Thank you. This organization is at the end of an era. And I think we would be remiss not to recognize Chairman Pickett's contribution to this. He served on this board for, I think, almost 25 years, which, from the makeup of this board, that's something to say, to stay engaged that long. His passion and his knowledge for all things transportation helped shape not only this county and this area, but the whole state. And I think we should recognize that contribution. I personally will miss his knowledge and his insight on this board. We didn't always agree, but he was always presented with passion and commitment and with humor. I think we will also miss that wry sense of humor that he often displayed. So just to thank you to Joe and for his service to our community.
Okay, with that, we'll go to open comment period. We have Mr. Mike Rooney who'd like to make some. Okay, thank you, Mr. Rooney. Discussion and action items. We're going to rearrange some items on the agenda. I'm going to move action item number 3 for the last action item, and then I guess item 8. Item 9 needs to be moved up before we hear item 4. So moving on to the first item. Okay, somebody else is here for. Oh, okay. I had no problem. I had you here for item number 9. Is there somebody else here for open comment?
Okay. Yeah. I'm sorry. I didn't realize. I was going to say that during open comment. If I could.
Okay. Sure.
So first of all, many of you already know me as the district director for State Senator Rodriguez. I want to be very clear, I'm not here in that capacity. I am the president of the Sunset Heights Neighborhood Improvement Association, and I'm here speaking on behalf of them on item number 9. You're going to see a presentation about the proposal to widen the trench, the depressed portion of I-10 that goes through downtown. And our neighborhood has some very significant concerns about that, not only for our neighborhood, which is going to have a huge impact, but also in terms of what it means for downtown and the way downtown is going to look and how it's going to be used and how people are going to access it in the future. So I'll try to go through these points quickly. We understand the Pass of the North is very important. It's not the essential pass for continental traffic. Much of the traffic that goes through the depressed portion of downtown, the trench, is local traffic, as the numbers will show. We believe that the Northeast bypass should be a priority before widening the trench. After that's built, we'll be in a position to truly measure the need for adding lanes in the heart of the city and in the Pass of the North. The pictures that you'll see are very pretty in the abstract. They show a lot of trees, they show a lot of stuff. There's no indication how that's going to be paid for. The details matter. These access roads will cut off neighborhood access to downtown, so you still have to cross many lanes of traffic to get there. We've had dialogue with TxDOT. We appreciate that dialogue because that's led to some of the softening aspects, I think, of this plan, but still fundamentally the plan hurts the neighborhood and we believe the city as well. There's some concerns that we have about the process, one of them being that while TxDOT was ostensibly studying whether or not there was a need to widen the trench or what the alternatives were. At the same time, there was an item on the MPO agenda to widen the approaches on either side of downtown. So why would you, it's putting the cart before the horse, why would you do that when you're still ostensibly studying whether or not you need to do that? There's a few other things that we have questions about. One of them is the need to raise the bridges. We were told that those bridges have to be raised to 18 feet. Not all of them are there. So we'll ask for a citation on that. There's a lot of research we have to do, and please bear with us. As a neighborhood, we don't have the capacity to do the in-depth research. We're trying to catch up. One thing that also the argument for the access roads, that they're needed to relieve if there's an accident in the core of the city. But once I-10 Connect is done at 54 and the border west opens up, you have ample relief valves on either side of downtown. That's another reason to prioritize the Northeast bypass, because then you have a relief valve that just goes straight up and connects to I-10. The one thing that our neighborhood's in agreement on is the need to resurface that road, and that's going to be a tough project in and of itself. We definitely think that needs to be done. So we're just asking that you all keep an open mind as this unfolds and as you hear these presentations, and challenge the assumptions about the need for this really expensive project. Some of the assumptions to us didn't pass what we consider to be a common sense test. For example, I'm sorry, I didn't realize. There's a lot more. I'll probably send this to y'all just as backup for you to consider. If I could very quickly just say, El Paso's downtown core and the core of the city, the pre-1925 core, is really special. It's the envy of a lot of cities in the Southwest. And we need to restore that, stitch that fabric together, not create larger and larger infrastructure projects that separate neighborhoods. And the Northeast bypass, we think, makes more sense to prioritize and see what the impact of that is before moving on. Thank you very much. Sorry about going over.
Okay, want to do item 1?
We will go into item number 1, discussion and action to approve the motions and minutes for the December 14th, 2018 Transportation Policy Board meeting.
There's a motion. Okay, there is a motion and a second to approve the minutes from the December 14th, 2018 meeting. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Item number 2.
Item number 2, approve the El Paso Metropolitan Organization Transportation Conformity Report for the 2015 Ozone National Ambient Air Quality Standard, newly designed Sunland Park, New Mexico non-attainment area for submittal to the consultative partners for a conformity review and determination.
Policy board members, thank you. Roger Williams, Interim Executive Director for the El Paso MPO. We just received a very informative presentation from TTI that really leads right into this item. That process that was outlined there is process that we followed back in August of 2018. The policy board was officially notified that we had to have a conformity determination for the new ozone NAAQS standards for a newly designated ozone non-attainment area in the New Mexico portion of the El Paso MPO planning area. The El Paso MPO staff and TTI staff that do the emissions modeling for us, which was talked about in that presentation, along with all of our partners that was outlined today, went through the process of developing the conformity document that is before you today. This document went out for public review. We've had a 30-day public comment period. There were several attendees to our meetings, and it's very important that we understand that we need to get this done by August the 3rd of 2019, or we will go into a conformity lapse. Conformity lapse is, as was outlined today, a worst-case scenario for a non-attainment area such as the El Paso MPO. So, with that said, I will open the floor for any questions that you might have. The document has been linked, and so you've had a chance to look at it and review it. We're asking for your approval today to submit that document to our federal partners for their review and recommendation on a conformity determination. I would like to say one more thing. Because of the government shutdown, we are very fortunate to be sitting here right now doing this today. Because while this was going on, the Environmental Protection Agency, being one of our planning partners, was able to get to the document and give their consensus on the pre-consensus analysis plan, which allowed us to move the transportation conformity document forward. EPA is out on furlough right now, but we were able to get the document for the pre-consensus plan ready and the document to public involvement. And today, with your recommendation to move it forward, we will give the Federal Highway Administration and all of our planning partners more than 6 months of time to approve this document. As you noticed on one of the slides that was up there in the presentation, they have a 3-month time frame, but it usually turns out to be more than 3 months. So as I've presented to this policy board in the past, we aggressively moved forward with getting this document ready to give the federal partners ample time for their approval. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
No, I would just want to say, I think we need to give some kudos to Roger and his staff for reacting to this and getting this out. They've done a wonderful job getting this out in a very short period of time, and they deserve a lot of kudos for that. And with that, I would move for approval of this
Is there
measure.
a question?
Yeah, just one question. Roger, on the, for the lapse, if it did go to a lapse, would that lapse be just for New Mexico DOT projects
Very
for
important.
funding, or is that for?
Thank you. Yes, as we've talked about a little bit before, but I'd like to go ahead and reiterate this, that if we go into a lapse on the New Mexico side, the coordination that we have right now with the Federal Highway Administration is that we potentially could go into a lapse in the entire region. But that hasn't been determined yet, that there's some question about that. So in the end, what we have always presented to this policy board is that this is an isolated area in New Mexico. And as long as we haven't changed anything that impacts our conformity on the Texas side, which we haven't, we purposely allowed the New Mexico conformity to go forward without coming in and affecting the Texas side. In other words, what I'm saying is adding additional capacity. And if we add additional capacity to a roadway on the Texas side, then that would change the conformity over here. That is a for sure trigger that if we go into a conformity lapse in New Mexico, we will definitely go into conformity lapse in Texas. So we did not do that. And by keeping it isolated in New Mexico, there's a very strong case for the fact that that would not impact the Texas side.
And just one other question. And Roger, then, if let's say it was a lapse, and at the transit end of it, when we get allocations from the feds, you know, 10, 12 million, $13 million to come to provide services, would that money be lapsed too? Or-
There are certain projects that are considered exempt. Transit projects, most of your transit projects will be considered exempt type projects. The one thing that can happen during a conformity lapse is that you're allowed to continue with exempt projects. Now, that all depends. There's certain types of transit projects that are considered new added capacity type projects too. Operational type projects wouldn't be impacted by that.
Board members? Okay, there was a motion on the floor to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a second. By Representative Moody. All those in favor? Any opposed? Or any abstentions? Okay, we will have item 3 at the end of our action items. So we needed to move up the report, item number 9 for Reimagine I-10. Is that correct?
Good morning, everybody. I'm Hugo Hernandez with TxDOT, Transportation Planner and Project Manager for Reimagine I-10. Thank you for moving the item up. I'm going to introduce Brian Swindell. He's with HDR. They are helping us out with the 55-mile corridor study on I-10. The presentation you're going to see is for our Series 3 of Public Outreach. This is a corridor study, so everything you'll see is conceptual. There's still yet to do project development on all these concepts, right? Bob, I don't know if you want to say any.
I think we're having a few technical difficulties with the presentation, but I think it's loading.
It's a big project, folks.
So bear with us for just a second. While it's loading, I'll just say that the project is a 50. If you're not familiar with it, it's a 55-mile study that goes from the New Mexico state line all the way down to the Tornillo area, and it covers a number of different improvements. So, and we've broken it up into 4 main areas, and I'll go through that in a second. But so there's a lot to this project. We basically looked at the solutions in 3 different layers of improvements. One is the what we call the operational improvements. Is how can we adjust ramps and consolidate ramps and fix bottlenecks along the corridor that currently exist, just to make traffic flow better and move better. The second layer is what we call a corridor-wide alternative, which is how do we handle the main lanes? Do we add an additional lane of capacity? Do we look at some other options for that? And that's something we're looking at. And then the third one, which we think is becoming more and more important, is the technology component of it, because we've kind of gotten past the point where we can build our way out of all of our transportation problems. We're going to have to partner up with the technology side of things to make sure that we are looking forward to the future. So this study is looking for 40 to 50 years out into the future, and so we need to make sure that in 10, 15, 20 years, what's technology going to be doing? Are we going to have autonomous vehicles out there on the highways in a lot more volumes than we would ever have imagined? We don't know. So we want to build in some flexibility to make sure that we can account for that. And I think we finally have our slide presentation up. So a little corridor background. As I mentioned, the corridor is 55 miles. It's divided up into 4 main areas. Segment 1 goes from New Mexico state line down to Executive Center. Segment 2 goes from Executive Center down to US 54. That includes the downtown section. Section 3 is what we call the airport section. It goes from US 54 down to Loop 375. And then finally, the Southern Gateway section is from 375 down to Tornillo. As you can imagine, and you all know this area better than anybody, each of those segments has its own unique characteristics and its own unique issues and challenges, and that's why we want to divide these up. But there are a lot of complicating elements to it. One is we've got 5 ports of entry, within our study area. And while things like the Northeast Bypass or the Northeast Parkway is something that is that I think, might have some contributing factor to it. Those ports of entries are within the 55 miles, so they're within our study area. So we need to make sure that we're addressing that traffic with our study. We have a lot of, we're looking at projected volumes on I-10 of about we're showing 303,000 vehicles per day, and that's a lot to make sure that we've accommodated. And we'll get into a little bit more of that in a minute. When we started this study, we looked at 6 main goals and objectives, and I think we presented these to you at a previous meeting. But basically, it's mobility and circulation, which is a very important one. Environmental, we want to make sure that we've minimized impacts to the environment as we go through this project, and also enhance the environment. Multimodal, it's not just the vehicles, but we also are looking at partnering up with transit and bicycle and pedestrian and other components to help solve some of the issues. Design, which is a key component. We have some design considerations we need to consider out there, as well as some new guidelines that we need 18.5-foot clearance under bridges on interstate highways. So that's something we have to factor in as well. Value is something that is very important because this is a very expensive project. We need to look at where we can prioritize and provide the most value, but also where we can partner with other agencies and other entities and even private component of it to help us out with parts of it. And then lastly is that technology component that I mentioned to you. So I mentioned those 3 layers. One of those was the corridor-wide layer, and we looked at 4 main alternatives. One was looking at just adding an additional lane in each direction and what that might do to capacity. We wanted to test that one. We also provided in the alternative number 2, the top right, what we call an enhanced shoulder alternative, where we add an additional lane, but we provide a wide inside shoulder that serves a couple of purposes. It provides an opportunity for incident management. It provides an opportunity for peak period shoulder use if that's determined necessary in the future. So it provides a little bit of flexibility. And then the bottom 2 alternatives are what we call an adaptive lane concept. And I'll get into more about what an adaptive lane is in a second. But the bottom left one is a buffer separated, which means there's no physical separation between the general purpose lanes and the adaptive lane. And the right one it has a physical separation or a barrier between the two. One has a smaller footprint, or the one on the left has a smaller footprint and provides more flexibility. The one on the right has some other challenges. So with our recommended solution, and we've been out here talking to the public this week in 2 meetings that we had, we're recommending that the buffer separated adaptive lane be the concept that we look at carrying into the next phase of project development. Another slide I wanted to show, and there's a lot on this slide, I understand, but just to show the difference between the no build and the build. On the left side is if we don't do anything, in the year 2042, the peak hour traffic, we're looking at speeds, in the 20s and, teens in large parts of the corridor, where on the build side, it's back up to where, operational speeds in the 50s and 60-mile-an-hour speeds. So it really shows a benefit of that. And we have some videos that kind of represent that. This is a video in segment 2. The top left is what's currently the existing traffic today. Now, keep in mind, this is under perfect circumstances, which means there are no accidents on the freeway. There's no police cars with their lights on in the medians. There are no, brake taps and things like that. The top right is if we don't do anything, and you can see in segment 2 that there's quite a bit of congestion. You might say, well, the westbound looks pretty good. Well, you'll see in a minute why that is. It's because in downtown it's all been pinched and bottlenecked because of a ramp that's backed up onto the freeway and it's not letting traffic through. And then the bottom one is if the recommended alternative, and what that does looking at the same amount of volume as the no build, and how we're back to those free flow speeds. So you can see how that the recommended alternative really addresses those components of it. I'll let it go through just a little bit. I just kind of wanted to go through the downtown so you can see kind of where that congestion is in the downtown area.
While it's going through, Brian, let me add to that this is all based on the MPO's travel demand model. It assumes the Northeast Parkway is in place and operational. It assumes the Border West is in place and operational. And all of the development shown in the MTP up to 2042 is in place and operational.
That's correct. And you can see now we got on the other side of downtown, you can see that the congestion is really backing up in both directions in the top right. And in the bottom right, with the same amount of traffic, with the recommended alternative, that's where we got a better flow of traffic. So that's just want to show you that we did similar simulations in segment 3, and which were the segment 2 and segment 3 are the two most heavily congested areas along that area. So I talked about an adaptive lane, and one of the things we talked about early on in the project is we want to build in flexibility to this design. We don't want to hardwire a solution to fix a very specific problem when things may change on us in 5 years or 10 years, and we don't want to be right back where we are. We don't want the project to be obsolete the day that it opens up to traffic. So we want to provide some flexibility. The adaptive lane offers that opportunity because it allows you to adjust it over time. Currently, you can see it's highlighted, it's bolded on there, that right now we're proposing that it starts out with the use of trucks only and transit to provide good, reliable trips for transit through the corridor. And that's one of the things we wanted to look at. But later on, as things change, like I said before, we might be able to convert those to autonomous vehicle lanes, other sort of uses that we could look at over time. And we can look at different configurations of it, from a design standpoint as well. It provides some flexibility there. Also, it has a lot of transit benefits. I talked about the reliable trips for allowing transit. We're looking at a couple of places to provide access. One is at Red Road, which not only provides access for transit, but also provides access from Artcraft Road to be able to get into this adaptive lane. So the trucks that are coming from Artcraft Road and are wanting to get on I-10 can access this adaptive lane to pull them and separate them out from the general purpose traffic. We're also looking at a potential downtown access point for transit, as well as one at Robert E. Lee Road, and then also down near at the end of segment 3 near Loop 375, so that trucks and buses can exit out at that point as well. One of the benefits of the buffer separated adaptive lane is it does provide an opportunity to provide additional access points if we need to, because we don't have a barrier in the way. We can maybe just break the stripe on the adaptive lane as a possibility. So I talked about the downtown transit. One of the things we looked at, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, is in conjunction with the downtown option in a minute, is that by providing a downtown inline transit station on I-10, separated out from the adaptive lanes where the high-speed buses can be pulled over to the side, provide boarding in line. Also having that downtown in the deck, we can provide access up to the deck, up to Mesa Street or Stanton or Oregon, to provide direct connection to the streetcar system that's already in place. So it actually connects the streetcar system up with that high-speed transit. Streetcar giving you that last mile, and the high-speed transit providing you that corridor link up and down the corridor. Just an alternative we're looking at. We'll need some partnership with Metro on this to make sure that this can come to fruition, but it's just an idea that we're exploring. And then the technology, and I'm not going to get into a lot of this. I talked a little bit about it, but the technology is intended to do a number of things. It's not just a lot of changeable message signs out there. It's not just a lot of DMS signs out there. It's how can we actually use technology to help us solve some of the congestion problems, whether it's incident management, using out-of-the-box ideas, including things such as drone information, using drones to help provide accident investigation or information, those types of things. So some things that are, we don't want to preclude them out of the solutions on this. We also are looking at how to make this 5G ready. That's the next generation, and connected vehicles are going to require 5G connectivity. And so that's one of the things we want to make sure that we're thinking ahead on this and looking at ways to do that. And then also, how can we, provide an enhanced intelligent systems. In the future, a lot of the driver information that you see out on the highway is going to be coming into the vehicle, and how do we help facilitate that, and how does that help us solve some of our congestion? So those are some of the things we're looking at to help us solve safety, sustainability, and then also the mobility component of it. A part of the technology is an idea that we're exploring, and we're talking with the trucking industry and the port of entries, is a truck parking component of it. Right now, truck parking is an issue nationally, and we want to make sure that, and it's a big issue along I-10 all throughout the nation. And so how do we provide an opportunity for trucks to know where there are available spaces to park, so we don't have them parking in Walmart parking lots or on exit ramps or in alleys or whatever, that we have them in a space that is safe and has facilities available to them. And then also in conjunction with this, to provide an opportunity to provide a border or port of entry reservation component so that trucks can park there, have a reservation for the port of entry. So when it's time for them to go through the port of entry, they can go without stacking up and queuing up onto the freeways and creating congestion that way. So those are some of the ideas that we're exploring as part of this project as well. Part of the big bicycle pedestrian or the multimodal component is a bicycle pedestrian. And this map is to kind of show some of the stress levels that are in the downtown area. And one of the things we looked at very carefully is how can we help facilitate bicycle and pedestrian movement along the corridor as well as across the corridor. And you'll see in a minute how we've incorporated a lot of those ideas to kind of help move traffic, move bicycle and pedestrian access across, but also link the uptown to the downtown section in this project. So those are some things we looked at. And then this is in conjunction with a lot of the bicycle pedestrian improvements that are already being looked at. But some of the key ones I wanted to point out is looking at the opportunity to provide a bicycle and pedestrian trail and separate sidewalk along I-10 from basically Copia all the way through to connect to UTEP. So those are some things that we're looking at, provide a good connectivity along the I-10 corridor. Part of it, and I know I'm kind of going in a number of different directions here, but part of it also is how do we make the intersections work? I mentioned looking at bottleneck improvements and fixing ramping and ramp consolidation. But sometimes when you consolidate ramps and you take all the traffic on ramp A and you stick it on ramp B with the traffic that's already on ramp B, you load up that ramp and then the intersection that's downstream of that. So we wanted to make sure we looked at all the intersections as well to make sure that those were going to operate in an acceptable level of service as well. Some of them required us to look at some innovative ideas. One of these is at Airway Boulevard, where we're looking at potentially putting in what's called a continuous flow interchange. There's such a large left turn volume on Airway that's going eastbound, turning left to go to the airport, that we felt it was best to take that left turn volume out of the intersection before the intersection. That helps make that a little bit more efficient type of intersection. That coupled with the Robert E. Lee connection I mentioned earlier would take some pressure off the Airway intersection there and make it function better. Another opportunity at Hawkins and Zaragoza is we're proposing a single point urban interchange. Currently, there's not one of these in El Paso. I think there's one, Bob, I believe there's one being designed right now.
There's one being built at Executive Center and Border West.
Right. Yeah, that's right. Just west of, or just south of the I-10 corridor. And if you're not familiar with the single point urban interchange, basically it pulls all the movements into one signal instead of two signals, making a much more efficient type interchange. With this type of interchange, you also need what's called a bypass frontage road, so that if you're going through on the frontage road, you don't have to go through the signal. You actually get off on a separate ramp and bypass the signal if you're going straight through on the frontage road. Similar to that is what's called a diverging diamond, and y'all probably familiar with that. It's this type of interchange that's out at Spur 601 and Loop 375, and it's a very efficient type of interchange. But like the single point urban interchange, requires that bypass frontage road in order to make it work as well. So we're looking at Eastlake and Horizon as a location for those because of all the development that's going on down in that area. We felt those would be a good solution. So real quick, I wanted to walk through some of the things that we're looking at in each of the segments. In segment one, we talked about one of the big benefits is providing continuous frontage roads. That's one of the things we wanted, that was an objective of ours as part of this study to help with incident management. And there are portions of segment one that do not have continuous frontage roads, so we wanted to make sure we address that. Talked about the intersection improvements and the ramp modifications and the adaptive lane. But in segment one, we also have a lot of other things going on. We have a lot of construction, whether it's the Arcraft Road interchange, direct connectors that are currently being planned, the Thorn interchange roundabouts, as well as the Mesa interchange also, and all the construction that's going on the Go 10 project also that we're making sure that we've incorporated. As with all four of these segments, probably less in segment four, there are going to be some right-of-way impacts. This is a project that is going to have impacts, and so we're trying to monitor those and try to minimize those as we go along as well. So segment two, which if you remember is from Executive Center down to US 54, Probably the big thing is the continuous frontage roads. Again, right now, we don't have frontage roads in several places along there, including adjacent to the UP rail yard, as well as over near the UTEP area. So providing that provides that incident management, but it also facilitates, it's not just for incident management, it helps us consolidate the ramping in a more efficient way so we can use frontage roads to move traffic off of the main lanes as well. We're looking at intersection improvements at Schuster. We're looking at ramp modifications at UTEP, as well as the Cotton Street area to fix the bridge issue there. And then also the adaptive lane, and I talked about the downtown access point there as well. There are some right-of-way impacts and some environmental challenges that we're going to be evaluating and minimizing as we go through this study. But I wanted to spend a little bit more time on the downtown section here, because this is one of probably the biggest changes in segment 2. As you can see from this conceptual layout, we're really, the proposed and the recommended solution is looking at only having 3 cross streets that cross. So it'll be Santa Fe, Mesa, and Campbell that would cross I-10. And the reason we got to this solution was because as we were evaluating the existing configuration with 2042 traffic, it was really creating a big problem, not only at the I-10 area, but also backing up into the downtown area and creating a lot of cross-street issues. So as we were looking at alternatives, it led us to this that we're calling the downtown circuit. It provides good mobility in and around the downtown area. It provides a lot of opportunities for cross traffic. I will point out it also includes at Campbell Road, which is right now a one-way street, be converted to a two-way operation, and that's something that we're working at incorporating as well. This does facilitate the frontage roads being carried through the downtown, which, like I said, that provides good ramping access and provides good, it facilitates good bicycle pedestrian components on the outside edges as well. So here's generally kind of what it would look like. TxDOT is looking at modifying this downtown and coming up with those 3 bridges and providing for the streetcar access across. All those bridges in the downtown area, because of their age and their lack of vertical clearance, are going to be required to be reconstructed as part of any improvement, as well as the pavement condition on I-10. The comment that was made earlier about raising the bridges 18 feet, really, we need 18.5 foot of clearance underneath. So really, we're trying to minimize how much, if any, we're going to need to raise those bridges, and that's something we haven't got to yet. So just keep that in mind as well. But all the bridges, because of the age of them, need to be reconstructed in the future, and so that's one of the things we're incorporating. But it would start off as this basic concept, but we wanted to show you kind of what it could be, and these are just concepts, so I want to kind of point that out. These are just one idea of 1,000 ideas of ways it could take place. The first one is, and I'll also point out that these are going to require partnerships with the city and private entities and private groups as well. So just keep that in mind as well. By providing that base, let me go back for just a second. By providing that base, we looked here, TxDOT would look at providing the opportunity so that they would not preclude anything from being done in a deck park type scenario. So it would provide opportunities for enhanced bridges and things like that as we go forward. So this could be a partial that would ultimately be converted to maybe the full deck park. There are a lot of design challenges that go in with something like this, including when you look at a freeway underneath a deck park like this, you have to look at tunnel type design characteristics. So there's a lot of fire suppression and ventilation issues that have to go into the design. So those are some things that haven't been completely fleshed out yet that would be fleshed out in the next phase of project development. But this is just a general concept. So looking at kind of an aerial bird's eye view of it, what it might look like, here's be the base, here would be the initial, and then this would what the ultimate could look like in an overall setting. The idea behind this was how can we pull the downtown area and the uptown area together? I-10 has been a little bit of a barrier between those for a while. How can we pull those together? Not only by providing this type of facility, but also even in the base scenario, providing the bicycle and pedestrian access that would be able to cross at Santa Fe and at Mesa and at Campbell, as well as run along the outsides of the frontage roads for the length of the downtown segment, providing really good mobility in and around that area. So I was going to show this video real quick that shows the downtown, and it's got a couple of components to it. There's no music to it, so there's nothing to entertain you, so you're going to have to listen to me talk while it's going. But it does kind of show you an idea and a representation, a 3D representation of what it might look like. Again, these types of solutions are going to require a big partnership, and I'll talk a little bit about where it's been done before and how it's been done before to kind of give you an idea of what it looks like. But here you can see what that partial deck option might look like in the downtown. And you can see how, as it zooms in, you can see the bicycle in the dark gray across the bridges are the bicycle pedestrian facilities. I will point out that Prospect Bridge is not in this scenario, but we provided the bicycle and pedestrian access by using Santa Fe as an option. Here we have the downtown that connects Oregon and Stanton with Mesa in the middle, so that the streetcars are actually connected together in the deck park, so that additional station could be provided there to provide that good access, as I mentioned before, to the transit stop down on I-10 down below, and that provides that opportunity. And here you can see that the frontage roads are now connected up. Yandell is now the westbound frontage road. In this scenario, in this recommended alternative, and it provides that connectivity all the way through the downtown area. You can see on the outside edges where the trees are on the outside. That's where the bike trail and the sidewalk would go along the outside edge, and that would provide that good mobility all along that corridor and good access all the way to UTEP. So as it spins around here, it'll kind of show, we'll go back around one more time showing the ultimate or the overall deck park and what it could look like as well. Again, emphasizing that TxDOT is committed to make sure that the bridge components of it would work with something like this, but it's going to require other partnerships to see this to its full realization.
You know, one of the things people talk about is the deck park in Dallas is a model. But in El Paso, we have a trainway. And is this really any different than the trainway?
So here you can see the overall, and the great thing about the El Paso downtown area is this can be done in pieces. You could do the initial part of it, and then as funding became available, do a little piece and a little piece and a little piece. What happened in Dallas in the Clyde Warren Park example is that as it was built, there was more and more momentum that was gained, and more people were interested in providing, contributing to it and being part of that success that it was. And so it ended up being a very, in fact, they're expanding it. There are plans to expand it as we speak. I will say that Clyde Warren Park, if this full project is realized, this project would be probably about 2.5 times the size of Clyde Warren Park in the Dallas area. So it'd be a good centerpiece for El Paso. It does link that downtown and that uptown together, provide that good opportunity for event space and things like that. So this, just like I said, this is just one concept of many that that could be done in a facility like that. So we wanted to kind of show you what it might look like. So here's some renderings, and you especially see on this rendering, this would be Yandell, for example, as part of the frontage road. We can see the high-end bike, two-way bike operation and the sidewalk off this separated out from the bicycle and pedestrian that would provide good access along the facility. These are just some artist renderings and architectural renderings of what it could look like from a ground level as well, just to kind of want to cycle through those real quick, just to show, instead of looking at the I-10 traffic down below, you're looking at, a much more community friendly type of facility. So that's segment 2. I know that was a lot to look at, but segment 3 also has some unique things as well. There's a lot going on in segment 3. That's probably the most congested part of the corridor because there's so many ramps in the area. Y'all drive this every day. Y'all know that the ramp density in segment 3 is very high. There are ramps virtually at every cross street and multiple in some cases. So the big part of segment 3 was how do we consolidate that ramping and looking at intersection improvements as well. I talked about the Airway interchange and the Hawkins. We're also proposing the possibility of a 3-level interchange at Yarborough. The reason Yarborough is because if you take Yarborough all the way up to Montana, there's a high a high-type facility connection at Montana and Yarborough as well. So this would provide a good another north-south connection that could facilitate a good movement. We're also looking at adding a future interchange at Pendle too to help relieve some of the interchanges in that area also. Talked about the ramp modifications, talked about the adaptive lane. There are going to be some right-of-way impacts on that side. We have a lot of businesses and elements that are pretty much right on the right-of-way. So when you look at providing some sort of widening, there are going to be some right-of-way impacts in that area. And then lastly is segment 4. In segment 4, probably the biggest focus on this is providing continuous frontage roads down to Tornillo, and also the Horizon and East Lake interchanges that are right in the middle of all the development that's going on down in that area. So it's trying to anticipate and be proactive and address that. So looking at a general cost breakdown, and I will point out that these are 30,000 foot view cost numbers. We haven't got into detail on the design yet, so these are just kind of ballpark numbers that we're looking at. You can see how it breaks down by segment. This is not a cheap project. This is a very expensive project. The purpose behind the Reimagine I-10 corridor study is to make sure that we have a plan for the development of I-10. Instead of starting to do all these Band-Aid approaches to fixes along the I-10 corridor, we have a plan, and so anything that's done is part of this plan and is building to an ultimate solution, not just some hodgepodge fix along I-10. And so that's one of the big components. Looking at segment 2 specifically and breaking it down, because this is likely to be the first project that moves into the next phase of project development. Segment 2, we're looking at a little over $1 billion for that construction between Executive Center and roughly Copia Street. This does not include the additional downtown construction. Basically, it includes everything on the bottom level. Anything above is going to be extra, and that's where that $160 million price tag comes in to provide those other features. We put some potential participation and partners on this, such as the local governments and Sun Metro, but also I think private would be a big component of this as well as we go forward. And we also wanted to put this into a little bit of perspective and talk a little bit about the Clyde Warren Park example. This is the Clyde Warren Park. If you've been to downtown Dallas, you've probably seen this. It sits on top of Woodall Rogers. It's between the downtown and the uptown area in Dallas. And it really does provide a big community area. It provides a lot of opportunity for development that has popped up on the edges of it as well, from the museums to other types of facilities that support the park. But you can see that the makeup of the money that went into that was quite diverse and took a number of different pots of money to make that happen. And that's what we're looking at this is likely going to be required on a project like this as well. And just to kind of give you an idea that, TxDOT is going to be, on that project, look to maintain the Woodall Rogers Freeway and to provide the construction of the deck and some of the tunnel systems. But the city of Dallas provided, a lot of the right-of-way. They own the right-of-way. They provided the emergency response, and they did a lot of the maintenance. And then the Park Foundation did a lot of the fundraising for the amenities that went on top of the park as well. And so that's kind of how that was broken out and broken down. So that was a lot to absorb. Like I said, we've been out here all week. We had what we called our third series of public meetings. We had one on Tuesday in the downtown area. Had one last night at the Ysleta ISD facility. We got a lot of good participation, a lot of good comments that we're going to sort through and look at how do we need to modify our recommended alternative moving forward. The next steps of this study are to take those comments, modify our recommended alternative, and then develop an implementation plan that looks at what projects are going to be included, how can we prioritize those projects, and which ones are really ready to move into the next phase of project development. And that's what we'll be doing over the next year. Yes, sir.
I have a question.
Sure.
It's nice and beautiful and stuff, but I don't see you tackling the parking issue. I didn't see anything where you want to funnel all these people, but yet we're having problems and issues. Well, Paso is having issues with parking when you have the games going on and people out in downtown and stuff. It's very difficult to find parking right now. So I didn't see anything.
TxDOT can't build parking.
I don't think he's saying that. I brought it up earlier in the presentation. Is it traffic going in and out? That's what when you're,
The downtown area, the concept will allow the flow into downtown. Parking is gonna have to be provided, city, private industry. TxDOT does not build parking facilities. We can get you there and get you back.
again, we're not saying
Yeah.
for you to build parking spaces. I think there should be a better flow of traffic in and out of the downtown area, especially when you have events going on downtown. Multiple events, you tie up the freeway. For example, in Winterfest, you had other events going on. You were backed up all the way to practically to Reynolds.
Right, and in 2042, if we don't do this, you won't get to downtown.
I think the other thing that would complement the parking, it's not gonna, I think parking is gonna be a partnership with the city to figure out how to make that work. But also the fact that we have the streetcar stations on top of that facility provides an opportunity to connect with parking in other parts of the downtown areas. Yeah, and the bus beneath it as well. So it provides a high-speed transit underneath to connect to the streetcar on top that provide access to parking in other parts of the downtown area. So there is that possibility as well. So that's the main parts. I'm sorry, is there another question?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the transit access at the bottom of I-10 with the transit lane is probably one of the most interesting aspects, because it truly allows connectivity from the far east side and the far west side, and then actually accessing existing transportation options to go to UTEP, to go to downtown,
Right.
to really provide connectivity. And actually, if you have a dedicated transit lane, like what's being proposed with alternative access lane, you really have an opportunity for mass transit to function and really provide an option for people not to drive in as much. If they know that they can get in consistently in a separate lane from Joe Battle or from Trans Mountain into downtown. So I think that that's a positive aspect, and it relates towards the issue of parking, because if you can get people out of their cars and walking around downtown, that's the best way. Our downtown was built for people, right? Our downtown was built 100+ years ago, 120 years ago, 150 years ago. It was built for pedestrian traffic. That's the scale of it. That's why there's blocks. That's why there's a grid. I'm not telling anybody anything else that they don't already know. And the thing that I look at with this deck park and with the configuration in downtown with the corridor is that when I-10 was built so many decades ago, like the Bronx Cross, like the Cross Bronx Expressway and others, it really created a schism. It created a tear in the urban fabric, separating downtown from the rest of El Paso. And I'm very, very concerned about who this project is actually building for when it comes towards that downtown corridor. Is it for people, or is it for traffic and cars? Because I had the great opportunity of going to a really good friend's wedding this past weekend in Dallas, and I went a couple times down to Clyde Warren Park, and it's a great place. It's a big green place. I love the sketches here, but honestly, if a deck park gets built and we're talking about vegetation, it should be all green. There's no reason it has to be xeriscaped when it's floating on top of a highway. But the thing about it is that, can you go to that overhead shot?
Like the bird's eye view of it?
Yeah, the bird's eye view. Because in the video, it showed something that it was from the video overhead shot.
This one?
Drone.
Yeah, that one works fine. The thing that concerns me is really, again, who are we building this for, and the fact that you're talking about creating this pedestrian lung, this connectivity there, but right now, you're already eliminating 5 to 7 entry points into downtown, including a really important pedestrian-friendly entryway, which is the Prospect entryway into Sunset Heights. Sunset Heights already was decimated when I-10 was built in, 70, 60 years ago, in the 60s? Math is off right now, I didn't have enough coffee. But point being is that Prospect is not Santa Fe Street. It is a much gentler way to get from UTEP into downtown through Sunset Heights, with sidewalks and not as much traffic as coming into Santa Fe. And that traffic issue is the one that brings me the biggest pause and concern. You have Santa Fe, Mesa Street, and Campbell now being the access points. Somebody wants to get into that downtown park, they're crossing over anywhere from 4 to 6 lanes of traffic. And on the access points to the highway, you're looking at 3 to 4 lanes, what it showed on there, plus a bike lane that pedestrians need to get over to get into this deck park. And that, to me, really creates an uncomfortable juxtaposition of wanting to make a pedestrian safe place, but also creating a very not conducive pedestrian experience, having to get pedestrians cross over 4 lanes of traffic. One of the things that I noticed at Clyde Warren Park in Dallas is that even though it is on top of the interstate, they have parking alongside the park. They have food court. I mean, I can show it here. I took a photo. You can see that there's food trucks parked right next to the park. There's parking that's right there on that access road. So, again, when we're talking about who are we building this for, having a 50-mile-per-hour access to I-10 that traffic can go on totally contradicts the idea or interest of doing a pedestrian-oriented deck park. And so I really think that those considerations need to be looked at in a more serious way, in addition to looking at the access of Prospect Park. I mean, you look at this, you have those they're called the Texas U-turns, right?
Yes.
I guess that's what they're
Yes.
called. You have those Texas U-turns right there on Mesa Street as well, right next to what would be a pedestrian-oriented plaza with a transit elevator stop and a streetcar stop. Those things really, I think, really need to be considered in more detail when we're looking at finalizing these alternatives. Because again, who are we building this for? If we're being honest about wanting to build something that's oriented towards pedestrians, that's utilizing transit in a 21st century, very smart and innovative way. And I love the idea of having those transit stops, those dedicated lanes at downtown that can take people from transit from Far East and West Side and other parts of the county as well. Then we really need to look at that whole top part as how it can really orient towards pedestrians as well. Because
it really is. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Let me address that, because you may not do the next phase of this,
True.
but I'm going to have to. What happened here is when we took a look at the downtown area, we recognized the schism that I-10 creates. The only way to get traffic through is to widen that schism. So we challenged the team, how can we ameliorate, let me finish, please. How can we ameliorate that impact? And this is one way. Now, what you brought up is a concern. But is there any less traffic? First of all, those aren't 50-mile-an-hour roadways. There's 3 traffic lights on the frontage roads on either side. One of the reasons that there's only 3 and that we have those returns in is to get away from having 6 on either side, because then traffic doesn't move through. You end up with the same number of lanes. So pedestrians have to cross the same number of lanes, but you can't get as much traffic through because now we have 6 lights instead of 3 to move them through. So in the next phase, which is the schematic design phase and the environmental phase, we'll be looking at ways that we can get those pedestrians across better, get the cyclists across better, whether there's potential for taking advantage of some of the grading that we have on the topography that we have on the north side, where we have a lot of rising terrain. Can we pull pedestrian bridges back and take them off a little higher area and separate them? Can we do the same thing for bikes? These are just concepts, just an idea of what can be done. And this is not what the final is going to be in that area by any stretch of the imagination.
It's
Again,
got a lot of.
thank you for that input. I just wanted to put
Yeah.
that on the record, those concerns, because I really think that they're important and need to be expressed.
No, I think that's good.
Right.
And we also got some additional feedback at our public meetings as well that we're going to go back and look at, specifically concerning the Prospect connection and We knew that by eliminating Prospect, we wanted to beef up the Santa Fe Bridge to provide a better connection across. But also, we want to look at maybe how we can beef up the Franklin crossing as well, because that's a crossing that doesn't have to cross frontage roads. And how can we beef that up to provide a better connection down there at Franklin as well? So that's another thing we're going to explore. But as Bob said, these are just concepts. These are just the first ideas out of the box. And so we're going to take ideas like that you brought up and incorporate those as we move forward on the project. So.
Like I said, I think it's really exciting to see really the forward vision and idea of the mass transit connection and really utilizing those transit lanes in a really functional way.
Well, just keep in mind, it's also a big balance between providing access in and out of downtown and providing pedestrian. And so how do you balance that out in a way? I mean, you can make this the best pedestrian facility ever and eliminate those connections into downtown, but that's not something that's feasible or that I don't think anybody wants. So how do you strike that balance and make something that's going to work? So those are things that we'll consider as we move forward. So.
Representative Blanco.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I noticed in the Clyde Warren Park, there were ARA federal grant funds, and understanding that they're expired at this point, but are there any other federal funds or grants that
We're going through an economic analysis part of this project as part of the implementation plan, and we're going to be looking at other possibilities of funding components that we could use. And it may not be ARA, but it may be other grants, it may be other tools that we might be able to use, whether it's federal or statewide as well. So we're going to be looking at those.
One of the things that they've experienced at Clyde Warren Park is that the property values all around that park have gone up very dramatically, which is a great situation where you can implement a TERS or use a TERS to fund bond issues to get that kind of money that you need to get in. The other thing on Clyde Warren Park, notice about 50% of Clyde Warren Park was all private donations. So, we'll be trying, or you should be trying, and we're working with you to help
And that
get
was
those
the
donations.
And that was the initial investment, because now there's been a lot of publicity and a lot of excitement about it, and that private participation has actually grown. So.
Yeah, just based on the transit end of it, those concepts are good, and we could do that high speed, but then we're kind of strapped because we need capital money to buy buses, 20 to 30 to 40 buses, and we also need operating money to operate that service. Just for an example, if we had 20 buses operating a day for 300 days, that'd be about $10 million of just operating costs. And then the buses would be, if we just bought 20 buses, that's probably $20 million for buses. And right now, we have no extra capacity to do those type of operations. So we'd have to definitely look at how would we fund that operationally to do that. Capital, we may be able to, do that through the federal government if, 10, 20 years from now, they start the programs going. But the operating would be a local issue that we would have to address. Not insurmountable, but we definitely have to.
Well, I think that's why when I said, when we were talking about that, it will take a partnership. It will take something we'll have to coordinate with and partner on that, so.
Yes, you have to flight to catch it.
I'm sorry?
I thought you had a flight to catch.
No, we got a little bit of time, so.
the City of Dallas bond program funds, was that part of a larger bond package? or
Yeah, it was part of the overall initiative. It was just one piece of that
20
bond.
20 million was part of that
Yeah,
one piece,
just-
okay.
Chairman, I would only say that in the next 3 to 4 months, we'll be moving into the schematic phase on this, sharpening our pencils. So we will likely have a website up. We'll be having a series of public meetings. People can continue to give us input, what your challenges are, what aspects, what things do you want us to look at as we sharpen these concepts and move toward a more defined project level.
I guess if any information regarding public meetings, if that could be shared with members of the board and other elected officials so they can put that out to their constituents as well, I think that'd be very helpful. Public comment, okay. Mr. Rooney.
Mike Rooney, thank you. This has really come a long way since, what'd you do? You guys briefed it, 8, 9 months ago? And so it's good to see where you've come from then. Councilman Morgan, I hope you paid attention that Cito Negron came up earlier and said he believes that the Northeast Parkway needs to be done before this. Mr. Bielik said that too, so that's in your area. Mr. Bielik, I want to commend you for putting, it says on the bottom of the photos, TxDOT does not have the ability to fund the deck park concept, so I appreciate you putting that in. Can you get rid of the pyramid? I haven't run into too many pharaohs here. And earlier during the workshop, we had the ozone briefing. Could we put trees and more stuff to, kind of Amazon?
These are just concepts.
Okay,
so, yeah.
but just keep that in mind. Would it be possible to brief the MPO on Mayor Caballero's old Central Park plan? That was using the railroad tracks, and it looks like there are ideas that can be incorporated. We have a new Congresswoman, Escobar. She used to be on the staff, her and Susie Bird of Mayor Caballero. If we're looking for funding or redevelopment funds, that might be a source there. And also, Representative Schwartzwein, your comments on the congestion and the traffic, those need to be incorporated too. Great briefing. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions, comments from? Good.
On one of the slides, it showed the funding for Clyde Warren Park. There was a portion of it that was from TxDOT. Is there a way we can go back to that slide?
It's 20 mil.
20 million.
With the city.
Yeah, we don't know what that program was. None of my staff knew what it was.
It's been a while since that was done, so I mean, the funding pockets have changed over time. So.
Yeah.
It was a 20 mil.
Yeah, it says STEP program, and
There it is.
Okay. We have one more member of the public.
City of Dallas, 20 minutes.
So no idea what the STEP program was from TxDOT?
hasn't been around for at least 7 years.
Okay.
Mr. Scott White for public comment.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Board. Happy New Year to all of you. I really enjoy seeing this presentation. I'm glad that we're looking forward. But I also really appreciate Representative Schwartzbein's comment, who are we designing this for? And any of these projects, we have to really focus on the communities that these projects are passing through and how it's going to shape their land use patterns, their future growth patterns. And public parks are a great amenity, but at the same time, when we start taking down buildings, taking down people's homes, we call in this project, they're euphemistically called right-of-way impacts. But these are people's homes, these are people's businesses that might be impacted. And that's also going to change how we have to look at these things in the future, not just for downtown, but all along the corridor, there seem to be these right-of-way impacts. And those kind of things also have that greater impact as they flow into the adjoining neighborhoods. So as we look at these kind of issues, we have to look at what that additional traffic or how that traffic changes all those neighborhoods. The area like Sunset Heights is already fairly isolated. And to get in and out of that, you're forcing traffic to follow patterns that may not really be able to get in and out of. And it's not just Sunset Heights, it's other neighborhoods. When we go headed east into central El Paso, one of the bridges that's being taken out is one that takes you to Wyoming, that gives people like myself who ride a bike easy access to what is a low-stress bike route. But the bigger impact, and Jay's already talked about it here, is transit. When we do these transit studies and we make these initial assumptions up front, who are we planning for? Are we planning for people or are we planning for traffic? And if this is really about reimagining I-10, shouldn't we be reimagining how people actually get around? If we can look at transit and say, how can we really fund that transit and make that a better option for people, does that take down the potential future congestion that might otherwise be there? Does it mean we have to make such a big impact? Do we have to widen these trenches? Do we have to tear down these buildings? Do we have to take more right-of-way? Or is it, can we move people much more efficiently if we change some of our base assumptions up front, and instead of worrying about how many vehicles move through these corridors, instead focus on how many people move through these corridors? Right now, a bus and a semi-truck, that's both one vehicle. Semi-truck carries 1 or 2 people and freight, but a bus can carry 30, 40 people, or if it's an articulated bus, you're talking potentially 70 people. That's a very different amount of people that are moved in that one vehicle in that space. So as we look at these kind of projects, as we move forward, we need to reimagine not just what we could do, but how we do it. Thank you.
Okay, if there's no other questions or comments from board members, this is just a report. It does not require board action.
Chair, just to respond to the question about the TxDOT STEP program, it was a selective traffic enforcement program. It hasn't been around for a while, but it was basically a grant to law enforcement departments.
Thanks for looking. Okay. Do you have a question?
No, this is related to DWI.
Okay. So that item's report doesn't require board action. So if we could move on to item number 4.
Item number 4, that discussion and action to approve recommendations for the Transportation Project Advisory Committee that the Surface Transportation Program Metro Mobility, STP, preliminary engineering and year-end fund policies. Ad hoc committee recommend amendments to policies.
Good morning. I've got 4 items I'll be going over. This is the first one. My name's Greg McNichol. I'm the chairman of the Transportation Project Advisory Committee. The first one is really all we're doing is asking your permission to review. There's kind of a key word missing in here. We want to review those policies, and if we find that there's potential changes we'd like to recommend back to you, we would make them. So right now, we're just asking permission to review them with this item, okay?
Is that clear to all the board members? TPAC is essentially just seeking permission to clean up a few policies, and they'll bring back those recommendations to the board.
Correct.
Okay. Is there?
Go ahead, action.
Sure.
Just a note that when you do that, make sure that the things you're changing, that you redline them out so we know what's being changed and what we see.
I totally concur.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? I'll entertain a motion to approve. There's a motion. May I have a second? There's a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Item 5.
Item 5, adopt the state of Texas and the state of New Mexico performance measures, the PM1 safety targets for 2019.
Good morning again. Okay, on item number 5, a couple things that we had questions of, and I'll just point them out to you in the discussion and options section of the thing where it talked about the targets actually go up a little bit. They are based on the previous year's data. They average, what we're doing is we're averaging or being recommended is that we're averaging the fatalities that are occurring. And because there's more vehicle miles traveled, the numbers went up a little bit. So if you, so anyway, that's that. I know in our case, we chose to take a vote on each state too. Now,
I would prefer a motion for Texas and a motion for New Mexico separate, please. There are 2 separate resolutions.
Okay, is there a motion to approve? I guess first we'll look at Texas first. Is there a motion? Yeah? Okay. We have someone here. What's public comment?
Good morning again, Board. Scott White with Velo Paso Bicycle Pedestrian Coalition. As we look at these numbers, one of my biggest concerns is we're basically saying traffic deaths are not only acceptable, they're inevitable. There's a large movement, not just across the globe, but in the nation as well. It's called Vision Zero. it's working towards zero traffic fatalities. And we should, instead of saying that these traffic fatalities are going to be inevitable, we should really be working to find a way to put an end to them. That means changing policies, changing funding, changing police enforcement, whatever it takes to bring down these traffic fatalities. So as long as we keep saying these numbers are there and these are the target, we're saying we're okay with people dying on our roads. I don't think that's a good message for anybody to be putting forward. We should really be saying our goal is to bring these numbers down. This may be what happens based on the past, but the goal of any body that's involved with transportation should fundamentally be, let's find ways to bring these numbers down. The goal ultimately being zero. We may never hit that number, but we should be trying. And I think as a policy board, that should be the message that you put forward when it comes to regional transportation. We want to reduce traffic fatalities. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve first the Texas performance measures?
Move to approve.
Second.
So motion from Mayor Miller, a second from Mr. Gonzalez. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? May we have then the second motion for the New Mexico resolution?
In their absence, I'll move to approve for them.
Okay, we have-
Trent's absence, I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Any opposed? Item number 6.
Item number 6, to recommend to the TPB the prioritized list of projects from the fiscal years 2019-2020, El Paso MPO FTA 5310 Enhanced Mobility for Seniors and Individuals with Disabilities Program, call for projects and amend into the Destino 2045 Metropolitan Transportation Plan and the Destino 2019-2022 Transportation Improvement Program. FTA Section 5310 of the El Paso Urbanized Area Grant Project, Amistad, DBA Amistad, fiscal year 2019 for the purchase of 4 ADA-compliant vehicles and operating funding using $593,321 of FTA 5310 program funds and $283,681 of local match. B, FTA Section 5310 of the El Paso Urbanized Area Grant Project, Amistad DBA Amistad, fiscal year 2020, for the purchase of 4 ADA-compliant vehicles and operation funding using an estimated amount of $590,321 of FTA 5310 program funds and $283,681 of local match.
Good morning again. On item number 6, just to remind everybody, in the fall, there was a call for projects. I know that the MPO staff met with the various entities that wanted to submit a project to them to try to make sure the applications all were turned in proper order. When they were turned in, though, there was only one application that was in full compliance with all the rules and regulations that we're kind of obliged to copy or to follow in the review of them. So on December 18th, a committee of 3 came together from the TPAC and presented information back then in January to the full body of the TPAC and made a recommendation that you have before you that the 5310 program for these 2 funding years go to Project Amistad.
Questions?
Yeah, I just have one question, Greg, and that is, when the MPO puts out the call for projects, is there like a workshop for smaller agencies to be able to understand the grant application process and what's needed?
Yes. And I can let Roger expand on that if he wants to.
Yes, sir. There is a workshop we do get with all of the entities. We do notify them of what that process is.
And I would share too that they're actually very good with almost any of the applications that as the agencies we try to file. They meet with us many times one-on-one, trying to make sure that you will cross your T's and dot your I's and get it all done and turned in a timely fashion.
questions, comments? Is that for both items A and B?
Yeah.
Okay, there's a motion to approve both items A and B.
Second.
Have a second? There is a second. All those in favor? Any opposed? Item number 7.
Item number 7, amend the Destino 2035 Metropolitan Plan, Metropolitan Transportation Plan and the Destino 2019-2022 Transportation Improvement Program to A, deprogram the El Paso Streetcar Third Year Operating Assistance Project, MPO ID number T108X-3/CSJ 0924-06-576 using $1,139,859 of Congressional Mitigation Air Quality Category 5 funds and $978,042 of local contribution funds in fiscal year 2021. B, program the Arterial 1, 1682 Boulevard Project, MPO ID number A433-CAP-PE using $3,816,000 of Category 7 STP-MM and $1,941,941 of local contribution for a total funding of $4,832,941 in fiscal year 2019. C, amend the Pelicono Drive widening dash build project, MPO ID number P410X-15A/CSJ 0924-06-534 to add $5 million to the already existing $8 million of Category 10 Coordinate Border Infrastructure for a total of $13 million and $1,780,000 of Category 5 CMAQ and $8,220,000 of Category 7 STP-MM for a funding of $23 million in fiscal year 2019.
Couple things going on here. One is that there's our, every year there are year-end balances. We start to understand what these numbers look like in December. In this case, we did put a committee together, the TPAG did, for reviewing those numbers. There were some last-minute changes in January with the actual year-end amounts. And what you see represented to you here, for example, on item 7C, is there were funding opportunities for an existing project. Again, we're following the policies that we have in place on recommending projects have to be, if you will, shovel-ready, enable this. The $5 million in this case is primarily going to change from asphalt to concrete, which will give it a much better life using funding balances, just to give you one example. And the other things are kind of related to STIP revisions that take place for the February STIP. And I know that Roger can pass on more information on this too.
Thank you. A couple of things here. We were looking at two policies, the PE policy and the year-end fund policy. And the PE policy reserves a percentage of our allocation out of our STP-MM program for the design for the municipalities, the smaller municipalities that don't often have the ability to do their own design. And then the year-end fund policy is a function of the reconciliation from funds that were left over in 2018, or maybe not. It could have been a negative balance, but we don't know those numbers until late in the year. We start seeing a preview of them about the November timeframe, and up until January, until we actually were able to lock those numbers in. So the first one is not a function of those two policies. And I would like to just point out that we're deprogramming funds here for the third year of streetcar operating, but the streetcar operations is already covered in year 2020. So we're not taking funds away from that streetcar operations program. It's more of a cleanup thing because we had it double programmed. And then B is a function of the PE policy, and C is a function of the year-end fund policy. And later in the policy board, I will bring a report for the reconciliation forward to the TPB to give you the final numbers on these programs.
In regards to item B and the allocation of that funding there, what was the process for selecting that project over others that were submitted?
Again, that was deferred back to the committee that was on there, and we did base it on, it had to be a project ready to begin. The 20% set aside is there every year. And I'll be honest with you, I wasn't on that committee, so I couldn't speak to it directly, but there wasn't a call for projects.
And I did attend those meetings. I'm not part of the actual ad hoc committee, but we did consider the challenges to all of the projects that were submitted and the timing of getting the projects to construction, and to assure that there was consistency with the project's PE and what's actually programmed in the MTP. The project right now is, according to the schedule for the PE, will be accelerated from where it's actually at in the MTP if they receive these PE funds. It will allow, and that's the purpose of the PE policy, is to assist with getting the design done, your environmental document done, and then taking a construction project and actually bringing it forward for construction. So you get that back up. It shows where if everything goes according, that it will be accelerated and will be done quicker than where it's at currently in the MTP.
But would that not be true for the other projects that were submitted also, that they would also be accelerated?
Yes, there was another project that was North Darrington Road that was submitted, and that project, we did the same thing. We considered that project. They were both scoring equally. We considered both projects, though we do have an indication that the district will be moving forward with assisting the town of Horizon City with the design of that project. And if that happens, then it would have allowed for us to put more money onto this project, because there's only a certain amount of the fund that is available, which if both of those projects had competed, it would have been more than we could have funded the entire design.
Mr. Chair, Jose Landeros, Vice Chair of the TPAC. Just to add to the context of the project selection for the PE policy, because the district is going to coordinate with the town of, there were two projects submitted that were both being considered for the PE policy funding. The town of Horizon City and the city of Socorro has both submitted projects. At the time that we made this decision, the town of Horizon City had received concurrence from the district that there would be assistance from the district in providing the design for the town of Horizon City. We had the discussion of what the hypothetical would have been had we evaluated both projects comparatively, side by side, and the fact that the city of Socorro's local contribution was going to exceed the 20% was also something that would have made that project rank higher over the town of Horizon Cities. And so it was just, this is the first time that the PE policy has been utilized in this fashion, and there was a competitive analysis. So that was part of the reason why the TPAC was requesting the ability to review this, these policies, to come back with technical recommendations, to put in a way to possibly even add some criteria on how we utilize the PE policy in selecting projects. Because right now, we really don't have criteria to look at that, minus the fact that the city of Socorro would exceed the 20% local match. So they had more local funds programmed to the project, which would have made them rank higher. And that's based on the project selection process that we currently have in place for other projects. But obviously, those are for construction projects. This is strictly for PE, so the need to develop some specific criteria for that comes into play here as well.
Any questions, comments?
And he was on the committee, that subcommittee that looked at this, by the way.
Did you have anything else to? Okay. Those are all three items.
I have a question on B, the future border highway east, that the designs anticipated to be completed in 2021. Is there any other projects that are currently under design or have design completed within the MPO region?
For which item is this?
Same item B, number B.
Item B.
I believe there were the two projects, as you heard Jose talk about, that were considered, that are the ones of the most need right now. And because we're getting text dot assistance, and that played with the decision that we're presenting to you.
Are there any other projects that are designed out at this point?
Not that we know of. This project came out of a Pell study that was done by TxDOT in the past. And what we have in the Border Highway East and the MTP right now does go out to that point where this connection could be made. There's other portions of the Border Highway East that go further out that we haven't been able to incorporate into the plan yet. And some of those other projects that would connect from I-10 down to the Border Highway East, as far as we know, are not as far along in design. And therefore, with this project, because of the connectivity and the ability to accelerate it, if they get the PE, was one of the things we looked at.
And remember, the TPB did want to set aside some monies towards those communities that might be challenged, if you will, at trying to find the funds it takes to do this kind of exercise. So we're focusing on just those projects. Others that would not fall in that category wouldn't have access to these funds yet.
Okay.
And it's at this time of year that we take whatever money's not gone to that 20% set aside, and it flows back, and then there would have been a call for project.
Okay, thanks
Okay.
for helping me understand it a little
Sure.
bit better. It's a great project.
Any other comments, questions from the boards? We do have public comment on this item from Scott White for items B and C.
Good morning again. Scott White, Velo Paso Bicycle Pedestrian Coalition. As I'm looking at Project B and C and looking at some of the principles that are put forward here, one of the things that as we advance projects and move them forward, we also need to go and review them and make sure that they still carry forth the best practices, the safest principles when we look at these design standards. When we look at Project B, TIWA, it's talking about a 12-foot lane and a 14-foot shared lane, which, if we're talking about safety, if we're talking about air quality, both of these principles really push more people to drive. And if you are going to have a shared use lane, who is it shared with? If you're talking about sharing it with people on bikes, if this is an arterial and it's going to be traveling at arterial speeds and have arterial volumes, no one is going to want to share that lane with vehicular traffic if you're on a bike. This is where you look at what we can do to make sure that this design really is designed for whether it's people or for traffic. Also with C, Pelicano, it's talking about a 5-foot bike lane. Again, if this is a project that's really going to be focusing on arterial volumes and speeds, that 5-foot bike lane really is no longer the standard in the practice. The NACTO guidelines now call out any kind of volume and speed like that for requiring a protected bike lane. I'm not saying change these things, but I'm saying as a policy board, this really should be your purview to go back and say, as we advance these, as we look at the PE, we need to be saying, is this really the best product that we can put forward that is going to be safe and provide the air quality and all these other things that we need to be looking at, rather than simply saying, does it meet the funding issue? There is a lot more that rests on your shoulders as a policy board. And I would hope that going forward, these are the kind of things that get considered as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I may, Settlenderos in this capacity is the Director of Planning and Development for the County of El Paso. The Pelicano project actually does have CMAQ, or Congestion Mitigation Air Quality funding on it because of the pedestrian and non-motorized vehicle components that it has. We are constructing the 5-foot bike lane with a 3-foot buffer that Mr. White described, in addition to a 10-foot wide shared use path or hike and bike trail that is above the curb. The hike and bike trail is meant for cyclists to utilize in a recreational manner. The bike lane that's actually on the roadway below the curb is something that if you have someone who's actually using it as a mode of transportation that's non-recreational, that they'd be able to utilize that. So I just wanted to, for the record, just state that the Pelicano Drive project is incorporating, as you can see with the funding that's assigned to that project, various non-motorized elements within the design.
Okay. Any further discussion on any of the items, A, B, or C? Okay. Motion to approve all A, B, and C. second was made by Mr. Mr. Gonzalez. All those in favor? Any opposed?
Thank you.
Okay, so now we will move on to item number 3. And for this item, I will ask that there be a motion for the board to go into executive session under section 551.074 to discuss personnel matters.
So moved. Second.
It's a motion and a second. All those in favor? Any opposed?
if something happens to Mr. Freya as well, family emergency, whatever, it doesn't bog us down. Sixteen's enough, so.
Okay, so we are now out of executive session, and we are reconvening back into open session. Again, I want to thank all the members of the TPB for this process. You know, this is one of the most important responsibilities of the TPB is to hire an executive director for the organization. I also want to thank the members of the executive committee who dedicated their time to additional meetings to go through this process. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank Mr. Roger Williams, who stepped in at a very critical time for this organization, hit the ground running, and really did a phenomenal job in helping to move this organization through some very difficult problems. And so Mr. Williams, we thank you for your service. You did a tremendous public service to this community, and we hope that we continue to expect many good things from you here in this organization. So thank you for your service.
Thank you.
With that, I will entertain a motion to authorize the chairman and the vice chairman of the TPB to enter into negotiations with Mr. Eduardo Calvo to serve as the next executive director for the MPO. There's a motion from Representative Ortega, second by Mr. Marcus. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that passes. And I believe we have still some reports, item number 8 and number 10 before.
Number 8, the reconciliation of MPO administered funding categories STP-MM, CMAC, CBI, and TSA. No, TASA.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to give this report, and it's linked back to actually an item 4, where we're talking about policies that are going to be reviewed by the ad hoc committee. One of those policies is a call for projects policy, and that policy states that the MPO needs to notify the policy board and the TPAC of the funding balances after reconciliation. So the item or the backup that you have here includes 4 funding categories: the CMAC, the STPMM, and TAP, Transportation Alternative Program, and the CBI, Coordinated Border Infrastructure Program. And it has where you can see the reconciliation happened between 2018 and 2019. Every year, there is a period of time where we're somewhat in limbo with what the actual numbers are, and we start seeing those numbers in about the November timeframe. And up until January, we really don't know what those numbers are. And you guys took action today on a couple of things, or a couple of projects that were using funds, actually one of them that was using the year-end fund policy, and then the other policy in there is the SDP PE policy, and they took funds from 2 different funding categories. As a result of what happened today with your actions, these are the results of our funding balances. So you can see in CMAC that the top line 2018, we've hashed out the numbers, and 2019, these are your balances. It's the same thing through all of the funding categories. Basically, the amount on the very end, the total available balance, is what rolled over from 2018 into 2019. And then at the end of the tables, you'll see an MPO balance, and you'll see at the end the total available balance. The total available balance is the real money that's available. And the MPO balance takes into account a couple of things, and that's in the case of the PE policy, you can see there we reserve some monies for that, and that's the money that was programmed today on the Arterial 1 project. And then the difference of that number and what you see in all of the other ones is the obligation limitation. And this is one of the things that we talked about today when going back and reviewing policy. obligation limitation is something that needs to be set aside, at least in the perspective of what the policy board has decided to do in the past, but we have not solidified that into a policy. So there are your balances, and the last thing I would like to note on that is under the CMAQ table states that starting in FY 2020, the El Paso MPO is losing an average of $2.3 million from the original allocation. That's specific to CMAQ, okay? So even though it looks like we have some money available here, that $2.5 million, moving forward, starting next year, we're already going to be short, and all the years after that are going to be impacted by the fact that San Antonio has come into the non-attainment status now, and all the El Paso MPO, all the MPOs, including the El Paso MPO, are going to be impacted by that. So that money that's sitting there and is available, the policy board can do whatever that you decide that you want to do with that money, and you can program it down to other projects, but the MPO's recommendation would be to keep that money for a rainy day, and a rainy day is certainly coming. And there's money available in the STP that is in the neighborhood of $2.5 million. This is the most flexible funding category we have. It can be put on almost anything, with the exception of operating transit. So it's good to have a balance, and I know the question then becomes, well, what are the chances that we'll lose these funds? As long as I've been here, I have never seen that happen. And as long as you are allowed to keep showing that you're making a good faith to keep your projects moving, and that you're not just sitting on your balances, we should be okay. So there's your available balances, and if we don't program down those this year, they will, I believe, roll over to the next year. And as we get to this point where we're at right now, by the time we get to the February revisions, you're really getting to the point where it's very difficult to program down projects because of the time it takes to develop projects and get them let. But you do always have to take into consideration that change orders happen on projects that are currently on the books, so these balances can certainly be impacted before the end of the year. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer that for you.
Is that it for this item? Okay, next item, the Executive Director's Report.
Mr. Chair, I only have one item in the Executive Director's Report, and this has been one of the subjects in past reports. The congestion management process is something that the El Paso MPO was notified by the Federal Highway Administration at our federal certification review that we were not compliant. And a lot of work has actually happened to remedy that, and I will say this, that Federal Highway has yet to give us the report, and we haven't seen what the finding will be. The worst case scenario is a corrective action. We have been working with Texas A&M Transportation Institute, and we have also been coordinating with the Federal Highway Administration, and we've already sent to FHWA how we believe that we are actually not as far off the mark as was determined at the early report of the Federal Certification Review. So with that said, we've also brought TTI in, and in December on the 19th and the 20th, TTI came in and worked with MPO staff to review the current CMP document and identify the potential updates and next steps moving forward. Internally, MPO staff is working on updating the CMP performance measures based on the local goals and objectives, including those that have been identified in our latest long-range transportation plan. And we've revisited the CMP networks to identify potential roadways that may need to be added. We're reviewing the strategies that are included in the long-range transportation plan, that's the Destino 2045 MTP, and identifying potential strategies that should be considered moving forward. We took the TxDOT Top 100 roadways that is developed by TTI, and we started looking at those, and we've identified that there's actually 3 of those roadways that are in El Paso, and we've also identified beyond the top 100 other roadways that are in El Paso. So what we're doing as a part of the CMP is we're identifying a local top congested roadway segments and projects along those segments that are in their current Destino 2045 MTP. We'll be talking to TTI today, and we'll be setting up a meeting for February to bring TTI back in to assess where we're at with the update of the CMP. MPO staff will then present this information to a subcommittee of the policy board. That's the Congestion Management Process Subcommittee. We don't have active members on that policy board, and at the July meeting with the officers appointed according to our bylaws, is when we should populate any of our committees. We could do it sooner, but I think that's a perfect opportunity. We need to get the CMP committee back in place, because that committee will report the status of where we're at with the development of the CMP directly back to the policy board. And with that said, that is my executive director's report.
Okay, thank you, Roger. Yes, ma'am.
How many, Roger, above 100 and how close to the 100 on the congested roads?
The actual number I'm not real sure of, but we haven't looked way beyond the 100, and we're already seeing that within there's 3. I can tell you right now that Mesa Road as a whole is in there, and one of the reasons it's in there is because we believe the congestion and the issues going on with construction on I-10. There's also segments of I-10 on the west side near US 85 Sunland Park that have 2 projects there and on the frontage road, not to mention that just above the 100 mark, the downtown area coming from the east to west to the depressed area is also on the list.
Historically, there are 3 segments of I-10 that have been in the top 100, and it varies a little bit when there's construction, but between 100 and 125 for the last 5 years, you'll find Mesa, you'll find Lee Trevino, and you'll find Zaragoza.
Thank you.
Those will be identified as the top 10 for us in the update to the CMP and looking at strategies to address those issues for congestion.
Okay. That, I don't think we have quorum anymore.
We've lost quorum.
Yeah,
When
which-
we started with this, but all this stuff is informational, so it's fine.
There is a
I do have
couple
an
of announcements, though.
Okay, I just don't think there can be any engagement, but
Correct.
you can give a report or.
About the training hours, the 28th of January will be the last day for, or, not the last day, well, yes. The last day to turn them in. After that, you will lose your privileges to vote until you turn the hours in.
Online options.
Yes, so you have the online option, and I believe I've sent you all the information. And if you need it, just let me know.
Newcomers, they told us 90 days.
I'm sorry?
As a newcomer, they told us 90 days.
Yes, well, for the new members, it's different, and I think I've let you know the dates.
And the bylaws.
Yes, I have a quick announcement. Just let me come up here. Just kind of, this is an FYI, but when, last year when we had the ad hoc committee on the bylaws, that Ms. Ortega chaired, and there was a lot of work that went into that, but also along with that, a lot of our recommendations were sent off to FHWA ahead of time for some pre-approvals, as well as the City of El Paso's legal office, our Elizabeth, what's her last name? I'm sorry? Newman, yes, Ms. Newman also assisted us. And there were a number of edits that were discussed that need to be done to bring our bylaws up to date. Our bylaws were, started off, and like most other things, they were added onto, and there were a lot of there's some edits. Nothing that will change anything substantive. It's simply it doesn't mention New Mexico for one thing. When New Mexico was added, we need to update that. Conformity throughout with the way that the policy board is identified. a few grammar edits, and one legal site that needs to be changed that was incorrect from the beginning. So I'll be sending out packets, or Marisol will be sending out packets shortly in conformity with our bylaws for amendments. And so don't panic when you see it. Nothing, nothing major, nothing is changing that's going to change the way that we operate. Thank you.
Okay. With that, thank you, members of the TPB. We are
Move to
adjourned.
adjourn. Oh, we can't.
Yeah, so just